One thing I do want to point out is there's a relatively new book called Karl Marx's Ecosocialism. When was it? But 2017, so relatively new. But Marx was working on an unfinished project called the Critique of Political Economy. And as part of it, he was doing a lot of scientific and natural world research. And so Saito, the author, actually got to dig through those, and they're not even all translated yet into other languages, but got to dig through those those notebooks, those unpublished notes from Karl Marx. And what they found was that Marx was even beginning to envision the ecological crisis as being absolutely tied to capitalism. And when you think about the time period, this is the time when like the city of Manchester, I remember reading a book to my preschool students years ago about moths in the city of Manchester evolving and changing their color. And it happened because the entire of the city of Manchester, which was one of the early forerunners of industrialization, was covered in soot. And white moths, which prior to industrialization were the common version of this moth, all of a sudden were very visible and easy to become prey. And gray moths, which were a rare but not unusual, mutation of these white moths, all of a sudden became hidden and camouflaged. And so all of a sudden with industrialization, we saw a species of moth actually change its color, and then post cleaning things up and to where we are now, getting better than the 1800s, they've moved back to that natural white. So the ecological changes were visible even back then. But there's a really cool up and coming branch of Marxism that gets into ecological Marxism, because at the end of his life, that's where he was starting to track was, oh no, we're going to destroy the world. Not only are we going to destroy workers, but we're going to destroy the thing we depend on to live.
Yeah, and actually one of the interesting things about Bookchin's early writings from the 1950s about ecology and socialism and all is he was one of the early ones to recognize the threat of climate change and dumping all of the carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases into the air. And so he was one of the early proponents when not many people were paying attention to it. He was one of the early writers saying this is really something very important that we have to organize against. And unfortunately, even back then in the 1950s, at that current level of industrialization, he had thought it's an important problem, but we maybe still have another 100 or 200 years to deal with it. And, we're coming up on, it's 75 years since he wrote that. But, it's accelerated since then. We don't have as much time as even he had thought was the case. So like Chris was saying earlier, we have to take these ideas and think about how these historical ideas apply to our current situation and what that means for our organizing. So that's, of course, going to be the topic for our next month.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing data that just come out in the last few weeks saying that we don't have as much time as we thought we did a month ago.
Right.
Where most of our ecological models that we use to base, how long before we kill ourselves research on, assumed that the poles, the Arctic and the Antarctic, are warming at about twice the rate of the rest of the ocean. But new research I've just heard in the last few weeks is saying it's actually 4 times, right?
Yeah.
And so all of our models have been basically 50% of what they should have been. So when I said earlier we've got less than 8 years, we're most likely past that oh shit point. We just haven't admitted it.
Yeah. So it makes organizing extremely urgent, which means that we should organize, but it's also important to just not flail wildly. we have to strategize. We have to cooperate and talk to each other and try to work out what's the strategy or a collection of strategies and tactics, for that matter, that's going to get us the best chance of dealing with this in time. So that's its own whole discussion. So organizing 101 in a month.
September 27th.
Yeah, there you go, September 27th. So, the basic idea is, we've covered some the Green Party, and we've talked about socialism today. And so we're going to put all those concepts together about how you can organize in your community with the Green Party to help try to build a larger movement to actually address climate change is, of course, the big the big elephant in the room, so to speak. But all of the inequities and all of the exploitation that we see in the world in general too. It's we want to create that socialist society that we've been talking about. So looking forward to having that conversation with everybody in a month.